Welcome back, guys. Jay here. So in this video, we're going to start setting up our player, which is a pretty exciting chapter. Pretty much, we're going to bring in a 3D model of a nice player, adventurous character, and then we're going to start setting up the camera, a follow camera for our third-person character. So which means by the end of this video, you're going to have a character that's not going to move. It's in the next chapter, but we'll set up a follow camera that basically has a third-person perspective of your player. And then you're going to learn about how to set up cinemachine in this chapter, which is a camera system that most games use in Unity to set up first-person controllers or third-person controllers that basically chase a player wherever they go. Let's get into it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my 3D model. So for this, I'm using this adventure character by this person called Maxim. So this person builds really good assets on Asset Store. I really like their 3D models. So we're going to use the free adventure character here for educational purposes. And I've linked this down below as well. So feel free to get it in your project. So I use this character because it's a good humanoid character and it's been rigged really well as well. And then you can easily put in a lot of animations into this character and bring it to life. So I like the details as well. So feel free to open it in Unity and then download the same way that we did before and import it into your project. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. It's gonna take a couple of seconds to download this character, put it in your project. So let's do that. All right, I'm not gonna cut this in the actual course. I'm gonna leave some of these imports as well, simply because then you guys can follow along with me. So feel free to skip some of those parts of the video or speed it up. Yeah. That's about it. Now we've got the adventure character in the project. We got a new folder over here called adventure character. Now, one thing I'm going to do before this gets too crazy is remember how I told you that we got to have an organization to our project. So even right now, we got the blockout folder and the adventure character outside of the folder that they should be in, which is the models folder. So feel free to start organizing your project even from now onwards, because that's going to help you when we put a lot more characters, a lot more models into your project. It's going to get too crazy. So start doing that simply. Don't worry about anything. Just simply click on the blockout folder and drag it into your models folder that we created in our first video. When you do that, nothing changes, nothing breaks. Don't worry about it. Just Unity handles that. So I'm going to do the same thing for the character as well. I'm going to move it into the models folder. Right. This may take a few seconds. But once done, I'm going to bring in my plane into this as well. So that being said, we're good to go. Just having a quick look at it, and then that's all good. So all we had to do now is bring in our character. So I'm going to go to the place that the character is going to spawn from, which is over here. So there we go. Let's go to the models folder, adventure character. In the prefabs, I'm going to have different variations of the man. So I got a couple here. Feel free to use any other model as well if you want to, but I feel like you guys should use the same character as me, simply because then it just makes this course that much synchronous. You guys can follow along easily. I don't want you guys to run into a new problem that we're not covering in these videos. So use the same character as me, and then after you get some more experience in Unity, feel free to explore and get other characters and other types of models as well. So I'm going to go with this character because it looks kind of like the Uncharted character as well, and kind of has an adventurous look to him. So I'm going to bring him in just like how I normally would, just drag and drop. And then, yeah, from the get-go, I think the scale is pretty good as well as compared to the plane. And yeah, looks great. So I'm just going to rotate him. So over here in the hierarchy, just click the character, go to the rotate tool, which is E on the keyboard, or click on this button over here, and then rotate him this way so that he's facing that side of the game. Move him over here as well. We're good to go. That looks good. We can always tweak it later. So next, we're going to bring in our camera system, which is cinemachine, which is an asset that Unity has produced, and it's quite famous and it's very easy to use. So I'm not sure if cinemachine is available on the Asset Store, but there's one place that you can easily get it from, which is the package manager. So go to Window, click on Package Manager, and over here, search for cinemachine. Now, what's the package manager as compared to the asset store? Asset store is a store that contains all of the assets, as the name states, but the package manager also has a bunch of assets that are sometimes not listed on the asset store. And that's because some of the packages that Unity comes up with, they directly put it in the package manager instead of the asset store. So as you can see, cinemachine is something that Unity builds, so you'll easily find that in the package manager. So instead of going to the asset store, go to package manager, search for cinemachine, and then you should get this. So just go ahead and download it and click import. All right, so once that's done, you should be able to close this, and you should have a new folder called cinemachine. It's okay that it's outside of our folder structure, but another thing you can do is create another folder called systems and drag in cinemachine into that. But for this, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave cinemachine outside like this in your project. But other than that, we're good to go. We can get started with designing the player. All right. What we're going to do now is we're going to create a cinemachine camera for our player. So over here, you should get a new menu called cinemachine. If for any reason you don't see that menu up there, feel free to restart Unity and you should immediately see it. And that's because it's a known issue that in some versions of Unity, cinemachine doesn't immediately pop up in the menu. And I've had that issue before as well. But luckily, in my version of Unity, that doesn't happen. But if for any reason it happens to you, just feel free to exit Unity, come back to Unity. You should see a new menu called cinemachine. So if you click on that one, you should get a bunch of different types of cameras. What we're going to use for this is a free look camera. A free look camera is basically a camera that allows the player to, like the name states, freely look around wherever the camera is placed, and you can basically use this for third-person cameras or first-person cameras to completely have a 360 view of around the player, right? So let's use a free look camera for this, and we'll explore some of the other cameras as well. For example, virtual camera is another thing that we can potentially use for something like a combat camera where it's fixed and it doesn't let you freely look around. But for this, let's use a free look camera. Click on that, and immediately a free look camera should be created in your scene. Now, a known issue in Unity, again in cinemachine sometimes, is that your main camera, when you import a free look camera, should have a new component called cinemachine brain, which is something that gets added by cinemachine by default. If that doesn't happen, once again, give Unity a restart and then come back. That's another way of troubleshooting it. But luckily, I don't have that issue once again, so I hope you don't either. Now, if you look at the scene, we should have a bunch of different blocks for our world. We should have a plane, and then we should have a character, and then we should also have a CM free look 1, which is basically my cinemachine camera, right? And then I should have a main camera as well. Now, what's the difference between the main camera and this free look camera? So when you import cinemachine into your scene, basically we give control of our camera to cinemachine. Cinemachine is pretty much like a director in a movie set, right? Cinemachine basically controls the main camera and how and where it should look at. And then in this case, it's a player and always chasing the player. So basically, cinemachine instructs the main camera to always look at the player and chase the player, right? So think of it like a movie director, right? So in this case, we have a free look camera, which is all good. And now let's have a look at what the game currently sees in the game view. So over here, you should have a game tab, right? If you don't have it, you should always go to Window and then go to, let me see if I can find it, General. You should have a game window over here, right? But it's over here, and I don't like switching back and forth, so I'm always gonna try and dock them down at the bottom. So simply drag by the tab and drop it in a convenient location. Now, this is completely up to you. It's just your preference. I just like seeing it down there in the bottom right, so I can always get a preview of what the player would see. Right now, the camera is sort of in the middle of nowhere, and that's because it's turned that way. But after we are done with the free look camera, the cinemachine camera, your camera will look at the player. So we're going to start setting that up now. Now, next up, just click on your CM free look camera, which is your cinemachine camera. And on the right-hand side, let's look at our settings. So in the cinemachine free look component, you should have a follow component and a look at component. Now, what's the difference? If you set up some sort of game object over here in this empty slot, your cinemachine camera is always going to follow that game object if it moves in your scene, which is exactly what we want because our character is going to move around. The second thing is look at. Look at means the cinemachine camera is always going to instruct your main camera to look at this game object, whichever thing that you drag in here, to always sort of have a look at that particular object instead of everything else, right? That's also what we need because the player will also use the mouse to look around the environment, but that doesn't mean that the camera should look away from the player. You should try to keep the player in the view and then also look around, right? That's basically how third-person games work, right? If you try to imagine how it works. But don't stress. What we're going to do now is completely a simple thing, which is to drag our player onto these two slots, right? All you have to do is keep your free look camera selected like this, and don't click and release, but click and drag your man while you have your cinemachine camera selected, just like that, right? And do the same thing once again. Drag your player onto the look at slot. Immediately, you should see a change. So your free look camera is now focused on your player, as you can see over here in this preview. But obviously, it's looking at it from the front and not from the back like a third-person camera perspective. So to do that, we're going to change a few settings over here, right? So I have my settings saved up here in another screen. I'm just going to tell you right away. So we have a top rig, middle rig, bottom rig as parts of this free look camera. What that means is if you zoom into your character right now, your cinemachine camera should sort of create these gizmos, these little indications right about the player, right? If you, for instance, don't have these gizmos, just click on this gizmo button over here. It might be turned off. So if it's turned off, click on turn on of gizmos, and then suddenly you'll start seeing these different indications, which should give you an overview of what we're looking at over here. All right, the next thing we're going to do, guys, is I have a certain, like a specific set of values that I always use for a third-person camera, and I'm going to show them to you right now, and feel free to change those values if you want to modify it slightly, but if you just want to quickly get to it, feel free to use the same values as well. So these values will change the position of the camera and what it's looking at. It's almost like a real camera where like you sort of adjust it until it fits the frame in, just like, you know, when you're taking a photo of someone in real life. So just like that, the top rig, middle rig, bottom rig are the values that we can use to sort of change the look and feel of the camera. As you can see, when I change these values, it changes the perspective while also keeping the player always in view. So what we're going to do is we're going to set these values that I have saved. So I have them saved here. I'm just going to set them right here. So for the top rig, I always go with a height of 6, and I go with a radius of 5. I had them saved over here. I'm just going to refer them and put them here. And then I set the middle rig to a height of 2, radius of 4, -1 to bottom rig, and radius of 5. As you can see now, the player is in view, and there's a larger environment that's being shown to us. But there's a few more things that we got to do. If you keep scrolling down the right-hand side, you have the top rig section here. In this section, just change the dead zone width and dead zone height to 0 and 0. What this is, the sensitivity and sort of the area where the camera will not, camera will be more reactive if you set this to 0. It's a dead zone area where, like it says, the camera will not rotate vertically if the target is within this range of position. So it explains it better than I could. And then if you scroll down to the middle rig, do the same thing there. Set the dead zone width and height to 0 so the camera is more reactive. And there's one more thing we do in the middle rig. In the tracked object offset, just set the Y to 1.3. Immediately you see a change. Now you see sort of a better view of the environment while also keeping the player still in view. That's exactly what we want. But there's one more thing that we got to do in the bottom rig, set the dead zone width and height to 0 as well. We are done with the camera settings, but we got to change one thing. As you can see, it's looking at the front of the player. We want it to look at the back, right? So that's quite easy. All we got to do is change the position of the camera. So it's over here. Now watch what happens. When I actually move this, it doesn't let me just move the normal way. And that's simply because the camera is always trying to keep the player in view like this, which is awesome. So that helps a lot. So just get it to a point where you're happy with the third-person perspective at the back. I'm okay with this, and you're good to go. That's about it. All right, with those changes, let's test out and see what it looks like. So you can actually look around the player, which is pretty awesome. But the problem is now you can look at it from quite far, right? Which is a little bit too much. So we might want to fix that. But also if you go down, it actually goes beneath the ground, which is also not good. So we kind of need to limit it above the ground. So we kind of stop around this point, and then we stop around this point as the top. limitation, right? So let's set those limitations in place. If you stop the game now, let's go over to your CM free look camera. In the top rig, 6 is a bit too much. I'll set it to 4. And then bottom rig -1 clearly is too much. So let's set it to around 1. Let's try that out now, right? So if you run the game now, you'll see that now the camera doesn't go beneath the ground, which is good. And it doesn't go too far up there either. So feel free to adjust it as you see fit. But we have kind of a tiny problem. I don't know if you notice it, but the camera movement is kind of weird, right? So it's not exactly like a third-person game. It's kind of behaving in a weird way. So how do we fix that? Let me show you the problem first. If you click your character, you'll see that the center of this character is actually at the base of the model, around the feet. Ideally, it should be in the literal center of the character, which is over here. That is the center of gravity or the pivot point. Now, I'm showing this to you because depending on the character that you download, the center of gravity could be in different places, right? The pivot point could be in different places, depending on who designed it. While designing, if they make a mistake, the pivot point could be somewhere else. So that's not very ideal. I'm showing this to you because when you use different kinds of models, they come with different pivot points, and you should be able to fix these issues, right? So clearly, this is not the right place for this character to have its pivot point. Now, we can't change the character's pivot point because that was done in a 3D software like Maya or 3D Max or Blender, right? We're not going to get into that. Instead, there's another way to fix it. If you actually right-click on your character, click on Create Empty, that's going to create an empty game object that basically doesn't have anything, but it has a space in your 3D world, right? It's invisible, but you can do certain things with these empty game objects. So let's call this center point, right? So something that makes sense. You can name it anything you like, but just make sure you kind of know what it means later onwards when you look at it, right? So the center point is at the bottom now. Just use the move tool to drag it to roughly the center of this character, which is somewhere around there, the middle of the chest over here, which is fine. So now what we're going to do is, if you click on the CM free look camera, currently it's following and looking at the man itself, the entire character. Instead of that, we're going to drag in the center point to the follow slot and the look at slot, right? Now what that does is, now instead of looking at the base of the character, now it's going to look at the center of the character, right? Which means now we need to make a few more adjustments. Now I'm going through this with you. I'm making those mistakes and fixing them because then you understand what certain what problems you'll have sometimes when you're bringing in different kinds of models and how to fix them, right? So, or else I could have straight up jumped to this part of the course, but I want you to get an understanding of how to troubleshoot these errors, right? Now let's change these values as well. So again, now we're looking at the center of the character, which means we kind of need to reduce this top area a little bit. So which means we'll scroll down here and we'll remove this middle rig Y offset that we added earlier, and we'll make it 0, okay? Now that's good. Now you're looking at the character and you can see that it's looking at the center of the character as well. Perfect. Now scroll all the way to the top and change these values once again, the top, middle, and bottom rig. What we're going to do is we're going to change the height a little bit. We'll change the middle rig a little bit so that we kind of get it in view like this. I really like this. So 0.5, for example, will be nice. Actually, a little too much. 0.6 or 7. 7 is great, I reckon. Go with 1. Yeah, 1 is better. I like 1. Okay, 1. So all I did was change the top rig, kept it at 4, middle rig 1, bottom rig 1, and the radius is fine. Let's test this out, all right? It's always about running it and seeing what it looks like and then coming back and tweaking it. Let's run this. If you run this right now, you get a better control of the third-person character. Look at that. Now that's so much better. That actually looks like a classic third-person game. Now you can still kind of reduce the top value a little bit, and you can bring the top rig down to maybe 3 to fix that. And that should sort of reduce the amount that you're seeing. Another way to do that would be to reduce the radius from 5 to 4. You should get a bit of a change as well. There you go. And that's so much better. There you go. I like these values. So we'll keep it at these values. Now, keep in mind, I just made those changes while running the game, which means If you stop the game, you're going to lose them. Now, there have been so many instances where I made changes to the properties while running the game, and as soon as you stop the game, you lose them. So it's tragic, right? So only do that just to test out values, but keep in mind that those get erased as soon as you click stop. So just remember that and then come back 311444. Okay, so as soon as the game is stopped, come back here 311445. There we go. Now if I give it a quick test, I can see that those values are now reflected. The camera is much more responsive. It has a better third-person perspective. And look to it. This is great. I like it. I really like it. All right. Next up, what we're going to do is in the next video, we're going to set up the movement of the character, which is the fun part. And we're going to link this third-person camera to it so that we can look at a direction and move there, and the camera and the player will move to the direction that you're facing. So a classic third-person behavior. That being said, guys, thank you so much for watching this. See you guys in the next one.